I'm Matthew Beckman. I'm an associate professor of political science at UC Irvine. This is actually my 12th year here. My wife was the one who saw that UCI had an opening in somebody who studies Washington politics and passed it along to me. And I sent it to my advisors at the time and said, this is the job I want. And I feel incredibly fortunate to be here. It's been a wonderful place. So I'm currently working on this book project about how life behind the scenes as president has changed and what it's like to actually be president and the time pressures and media pressures on the modern presidency. And it's remarkable when you look at somebody like John Kennedy, whom we think of as sort of a public president, very involved in media affairs and held these press conferences and such. The amount of free time he had relative to modern presidents and the relative obscurity that he was able to obtain during his presidency is remarkable. And so, but he had this great line where he said, every presidential candidate has to take positions on everything from cranberries to creation. And I think it was true then, and it's even more true now, where every statement, every policy proposal is so micromanaged and vetted by the media and becomes such a media sensation that it is in many ways a defining feature of the modern presidency is having to adhere to the audience and incentives of the reporters as opposed to just solving problems, thinking about how you want to deal with it within the bureaucracy, within the administration, within Congress. I do think that the media pressures on the presidency have changed in dramatic ways and are more so now than in the past. One way to think of it has been in terms of bipartisanship. In a previous era, in the 60s and 70s, presidents and opposing party leaders were able to meet and they could be confident, relatively confident, that they could have these discussions about potential deals and offer ideas without having to worry that the next day it would leak into the press as aggressively and all these interest groups and internet sites would then collapse on it and nitpick every part of the deal. They had time and space to sort of deliberate a little bit. And nowadays, everyone is so aware that every conversation is going to leak into the press and get into the bloodstream and everyone's going to circle around it, that it's much harder to have sort of candid conversations about the potential ways that you might get along, as opposed to just running to cameras and hammering each other about how you won't get along. Politicians are politicians, and the way they get their job is by appealing to voters. And they are first and foremost concerned about things that will cost them their job. And in today's climate, where interest groups and bloggers and reporters are so intimately woven into every discussion, it makes it harder to take a chance on a policy deal. And you can see it with certain candidates. I mean, Marco Rubio for a while took a chance on reaching a bipartisan deal on immigration reform. And in doing so, it's been perilous for his campaign subsequently. You could imagine a time in the past where Ronald Reagan did cut a deal on immigration. On several things. Ronald Reagan was much more able to reach bipartisan deals than current politicians have been able to, certainly Barack Obama. And it's one of the reasons, I think, is because it's so much harder to have the space to have a conversation where you can find common ground, as opposed to everyone just sticking to their talking points and not risking alienating any part of their base. So I think the next president is going to have a very challenging environment to occupy for a variety of reasons. The first is there's not going to, at least as we sit here today and look at it, there isn't the sort of major crisis environment like Barack Obama inherited when he took over. So one of the times in which presidents tend to matter the most and have the broadest latitude to make a big difference is when the country is in crisis, economic or sort of national security crisis. President Bush faced 9/11 and had broad latitude about how best to prosecute the war on terror, what they called the war on terror. President Obama inherits the Great Recession, a basic market panic in many ways, and also two wars that are ongoing and unpopular. And so in those early years, early parts of their first term in office, each president had sort of this window to do a lot of things, and each of them did. I mean, George Bush was a very consequential president. Barack Obama was a very consequential president. Looking ahead to the start of the next term, the economy isn't growing as fast as people would like, but it isn't in dire straits either. The overseas national security environment has lots of things to address, ISIS and problems in Somalia and beyond. But there isn't the obvious tangible pressures of a war, ongoing war or emergent war. And so I think among the biggest challenge of the next presidency is there isn't going to be a crisis that everyone's going to set aside normal politics and defer to the president or look to the president for leadership. And in these normal political times today where things are so polarized and partisans are so divided, it means that normal politics is basically gridlock politics, where everyone is looking for a reason to stalemate and not get much done. And I think you're always on safe ground predicting that nothing will get done. The biggest caveat to that, or the exception to that general rule, is we've got the Supreme Court opening sitting out there. And it's interesting to think about gaming out the dynamics of what happens as the election gets closer. So I'm kind of interested to see how this plays out. It might be that the next president's biggest impact is not so much direct, but indirectly in shaping how the Supreme Court vacancy gets handled.